My blog today is on the topic of self-care. And believe it or not, decluttering has a lot to do with caring for yourself. I talk about what self-care is and what self-care is not. And I thought I would illustrate it with a story that happened a couple of weeks ago. When my husband was in the hospital, he had stayed there overnight and he had gone through a lot of tests on his heart. It was around dinner time and Dan just looked at me and said he was exhausted and what am I still doing here? What am I still doing at the hospital? He said, staying there is not going to do either one of us any good, and me being sick is not going to help things. So he said, go home, relax. And my good friend was available, and she is priceless to have as a friend. She always seems to know what I need. And she said, how about going out to dinner? And I said, oh yes, we can go out to dinner. Somehow that hospital food just was not appetizing. And Dan was exhausted, and watching him sleep was not going to help either one of us. So I had a plan. I said, I texted her, I said, how about a fancy place? And she texted back, I have no idea, Sandy, what you mean by fancy. So I said, well, fancy is, and I told her the name of the place. And I said, fancy to me is dressing up a little bit. Fancy is cloth napkins. Fancy is wonderful food served on real dishes and excellent service. That is fancy. So she picked me up in her blue dream, is what I call it, because her car is such a lovely shade of green, shade of blue. And it is so nice to ride in. And it's nice when you're stressed out to be chauffeured and not have to think about going somewhere, not have to think about where to turn. You're just there in the passenger seat. So that in itself was a luxury. And she said, well, she was in some sort of casual clothes, but I told her what I was gonna wear. We're going to a fancy pants restaurant, so I'm gonna wear my fancy pants. I had some pants that I had just purchased. They were polka dot and they were comfortable and they made me feel special. And I put on a little jewelry and a nice top with it. And she drove up in her blue dream and she stepped up to the plate as far as her fashion. She wore some fancy pants too. Beautiful fancy pants and a fancy top and fancy jewelry and lovely shiny hair. And we both went to that wonderful restaurant and we had some fancy food and we treated ourselves to an evening of good conversation and laughter. And I'm a verbal processor, and my husband had just gotten a diagnosis that was scary, and I needed to verbally process that with her. And she was such a good listener, so caring. And I also listened to some of her stuff. I got my mind off of my stuff. And the service was just excellent. They just kept coming to our table and asking of us we wanted. They didn't rush us. I think we were there for at least a couple of hours, which seemed like 10 minutes really. But it was wonderful, relaxing, regenerating, refreshing. It was well needed. And that, my friends, is self-care.